Hey everyone, I'm recording this video today just to give you a quick insight into the development process. I thought that might be interesting for those who are testing the project who either are working on a project themselves or who may want to work on a project in the future, work in the video games industry, um, or who generally find this kind of thing just interesting. So let me give you a quick explanation of what I'm up to here. The last few days we've been looking at the controls in the game. And one of the things about the game development process that you have to bear in mind, at least as an indie studio, is that you can't do everything to a highly finished state immediately. So I call this the IKEA principle. And I get the name from the fact that if you've ever bought a piece of furniture from IKEA and you're putting it together, you put it together loosely, and then there's a stage where you reach where you have to kind of screw it together, tighten it all up. And it's usually a really big mistake if you tighten up one part of the piece of furniture first really hard, because that will make other parts of the furniture really hard to fit together quite often, and sometimes it makes it impossible. So I usually follow a process where I go around in a sort of circuit. I tighten up a screw a little bit, I tighten up the next one a little bit, and you go round and round and round until eventually it all comes together and you end up with a piece of furniture that isn't broken and kind of works together nicely. And there's a very similar parallel to any kind of complex project, really. It's not just video games. If you're trying to build a car, it's the same kind of thing. You don't, especially when there's design involved, you don't want to lock yourself down too quickly. So that's why, right now, the settings in the game are not particularly wonderful. They're kind of like a placeholder. And it's also why many things in the game are not particularly wonderful, And you may also wonder why, other things which are possibly disproportionately worked on, like the graphics, why are they better than other elements of the game, which are probably, just as important. And the reason for that is just marketing, People like things that look good. People like things that work well, look attractive, so on and so forth. So you really have to get a game to a point where it looks pretty good before you should probably share it with people, because otherwise just the fact that it doesn't look so good will put them off, which is kind of shallow, but it's just the way people are. If you show people a supercar without the bodywork in its very early stages, people are like, oh, yeah, okay, that's all right. And you can show them the specifications, and the real sort of car nerds out there will really spooge over that, but most people will just be put off by the fact that it doesn't look good. So you have to, and that's why really concept cars are a thing, because they're the other way around. They don't actually exist, they're just a concept, but people love them because it gives you an idea of what the car could be. So you don't, as an indie studio, I don't really have that resource. I don't have the ability, the resources to kind of produce concept art. I just have to kind of get on with it. So anyway, today what I'm showing you is the new version of the settings panel, which is very much a work in progress. And right now, it's only really like a day's worth of work, so there's not really that much that's gone into it. But I just wanted to show you the changes anyway. So if I open up settings, here we go. So the idea is that I want to give a lot more space to the settings. Originally I didn't really have that many settings, so it didn't really make much sense to have like multiple screens of settings, because I didn't have any. And as time has gone along, the settings have built up based on feedback from various people. And also, I need myself to test the game. Things like video resolution setting and quality. I wanted to get quality in there quite early on so I could make sure that it worked reasonably well. So obviously it gets to a certain point where you start thinking, okay, well, some of these settings don't necessarily make sense together on the same screen. Although, there's always an element of that. You always have to put things together that don't necessarily fit together wonderfully well. So what I've decided on is that for Marble Odyssey, we're going to have 3 setting screens. And I think that'll be enough. If it's not, I'll change this design. And the nice thing about this design is it although it tries to fit in with the physical sort of aesthetic of Marble Odyssey, where the UI isn't actually just bitmap based; it's actually physically lit, and it's a physical object. The downside to doing things that way is that you have to physically make things work, which can be really difficult with the UI, because it's just much easier if it's kind of more like web-based, which is kind of what most UIs are like. So what I decided to do was, to be able to switch between these panels, I could either have a system where the panels slide in and out of some kind of mechanism, which would be really, really complicated. And I thought at the end of the day, it just wasn't worth the effort, considering it's not really that important in the whole overall scheme of things. It's just a thing to put settings on. So my idea last night was, why don't I just have kind of like a rotisserie, kind of like old school. I mean, that's the idea of it, is that it's meant to have this very sort of almost like steampunk kind of aesthetic to it. So I thought, if I do a kind of rotisserie where like a barrel that you roll, and on the different sides of the barrel you've got the different settings panels. So this is where I got to last night. I've moved the settings around to these different panels. They are functional, except that they don't currently work because there's a technical reason for that, which I'll show you in a second. So let me just show you how it's going to work. So there we go. It's going to actually rotate like this to change between the different sets of panels. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So there you are. There's the audio video settings, and you can see we've got lots of space on there for more settings, which is really cool. And the other advantage, obviously, to spreading things out like this is that we also get a lot more space for the existing settings, so we can make them larger and a little bit easier to use, and also the text gets bigger, more legible. And I find text in Unity, even with this particular plugin, sometimes can be a little bit skanky looking when it's small. That's just a problem of text in general when you get to small sizes, pixelating and not looking so good. So these ones actually are still quite small. They could actually be made larger now. So that's something I'll probably do in the future. I'll just scale these up and just make them a little bit larger and easier to read. You can see you've got lots of space on the left and the right to make them bigger now. Well, yeah, obviously the elephant in the room is that there's just huge amounts of space on this panel right now. So this is the general panel, which is going to be like a grab bag of things that don't make any sense in audio and video and input. And based on feedback, I might obviously move things around between the panels if people really think that camera control should be in input. There's an argument for that, then I could put it there. So you've got the general panel, you've got the oh, you have to bear me with it. Sometimes this will flip weirdly as I control it. That obviously won't happen when it's finished. This is the input panel, which you can see right now has a lot of space on it, which is great because we need room to put keyboard controls and other tweaks to the input, like how sensitive maybe left and right is. Things like that. I don't want to change those too much because there's gameplay's implication about making a game more sensitive and less sensitive, sometimes it's better to put everybody on the same playing field and then, just let them compete against each other on a level playing field. I kind of feel like, if you had the ability to choose how quickly you could turn, that's almost like an athletic skill, and I think that would probably unbalance the game. But anyway, yeah, so we've got the option here to have various tweaks to input that make sense and don't break the game. Don't make it unfair for certain people. And then we've got the video, audio and video controls. And again, there's plenty of room on here to have a lot more controls. So probably what will happen is this UI will remain untextured. It's untextured right now. I'm just using basic shaders, which work, but which don't look amazingly well. I mean, they shade. As you can see, as it rotates, it looks quite nice. But these are untextured, so there's a good reason for that, which is the whole IKEA principle, which is there's absolutely no point in me texturing these when it's going to change, and it's probably going to change until the game is released. So probably very close to the game getting released is actually the point at which I'll go in and texture these panels. If it turns out to be a pain, what I might do is I might come up with a system that's a little bit more generic, where I can kind of texture it now, and then later on maybe add in details like dirt around these sub panels and things like that, just to make it a little bit more physically real looking, you know. And before I finish off with this, there's one other thing I'd like to show you, which is so, you know, one of the big issues I found with developing the game as a physical 3D UI is that depth of field can be problematic, and you can see it really badly here. So what's happening is, if I snap this back to general, you can see that I've got these text labels at the top, which are actually going to be buttons. You're going to be able to click on these to switch between the different panels. And when you click on them, they will change brightness to indicate which one of these is the selected panel. And the entire panel will basically rotate very quickly round to the panel that you just clicked on. So in fact, these buttons are replicated 3 times. Each panel has these 3 buttons on them. And they're physical text elements which are sort of sitting just above the lip here. You can actually see them, there you are. And that means that you can see the close button on the panel above. There. So this is something I've yet to resolve. And the other problem is that when you rotate and the text overlaps the edge of the UI, as you can see, if we watch close at the top up there, you can see it blurs really, really heavily. And that's because it probably doesn't have any sort of Z depth information of its own. And that means that as far as Unity is concerned, it's actually way, way further away from the camera than it is. As you can see, it should be using the Z information of the geometry that it's a child of. It's a child of this panel, but it doesn't seem to do that, which is a bit of a bugger. So probably there's a couple of ways around this. One way is to put a panel behind it, a little sub panel, which will make it look a little bit more button-like, which isn't a bad thing. And then the other way to do it is that when the camera rotates past a certain point, when the panel rotates past a certain point, we actually disable it and we hide it. That's a little bit hokey, and it might prove to be impractical because you might actually see it popping into existence. Maybe, maybe not. I might have to write some code that does that intelligently for the different button sets. So for instance, if you look at that close button, right, when it's here, it should be visible, right? And then once it gets sort of edge on, sorry, it's popping because of the spinner that I'm using off screen. When it gets to there, it could quite easily disappear, right? And now you wouldn't be able to see it. So yeah, it could work. It's something which I have to experiment with and see if it's actually going to work out. And if it doesn't work out, then like I said, I'll put something physically behind it. And that will probably help a bit. But the only problem with that is it'll probably make the UI look a little bit more ugly, I think. So maybe not the way to go. So yeah, hopefully that's given you a little bit of an insight into the development process, and you know the way that it works. That you don't necessarily design things 100% before you start working on them. I find that from experience that it's better to have an idea. Certainly, you know, make a design. If you can't visualize things in your head, it's definitely a good idea to draw things on a piece of paper or whatever. And get your idea down and you know, have a good think about it before you start working on it. But don't get trapped into this thinking that you can kind of sit there and close your eyes and really concentrate really hard and work out exactly how everything's going to work 100%, every single option, every single different facet of the entire project, because you can't. Nobody is superhuman, and you'd have to be superhuman to be able to do that. I think, you know, especially developers, software developers, sometimes think like that. There's a famous story about Steve Wozniak basically designing the Apple II in his head, and then making it, on a prototype board and putting it all together. He switched the machine on, and it started working, and everything was perfect. You know, and I think that obviously makes a lot of people think that they can do that with other complex projects. You know, that you can you can kind of design the entire thing in your head and literally just build it straight ahead without any sort of going back and making changes. And I think in reality that isn't the way it works. You have to be open to the fact that you're going to make mistakes. It's a good idea, for instance, to get things in front of people sooner rather than later, which is kind of what I'm doing here. And you can kind of you can then iterate, on what you've done and make changes, and basically don't paint yourself into a corner and then have to justify why you're in that corner, and then just not actually change anything because that's just the way it's going to be. That isn't a good design process. You should be able to adapt to changes and take on board feedback, and then hopefully produce something that works for everybody. Anyway, hope this video was useful, and I'll probably produce more videos like this as and when I can, because I think they'll be interesting. But anyway, let me know what you think, and please go to the Steam page for Marvel Odyssey and follow us and put us on your wish list, because obviously you can see how much work is involved in producing a game like this, and all of that work is wasted unless we actually have some customers that buy the game and enjoy it. Okay, so see you again soon.